Hi, and welcome back to day 10 of the Augusta Sew Along. Today we're ready to assemble and attach our collars. Since we've already done our lapels, there's nothing to be scared of in this lesson. It'll go quickly and smoothly, I promise. So let's get started. For today's lesson, we're going to need our garment, our upper collar, and our under collar. And remember that we have fused our upper collar, so if you haven't done that, do that now. We're going to start by taking our under collar, turning it so the wrong side is facing up, and then laying it on top of the upper collar. So here we have under collar wrong side up, upper collar right side up. And you can see here at the bottom, the upper collar is slightly longer than the under collar, and this is on purpose. This way when you fold the collar right side round, this area where it's shy forces the seam allowance to roll to the under collar so you can't see it from the top. So you want that. That's not a cutting error. So start by pinning around your upper collar. Here I've started at the match point. And then just pin the other side. Again, here's the match point. Pin the sides. Pin the center. And then pin between. Now we're going to head over to our sewing machine and we're going to sew from one match point up, pivoting at the corner, then sewing across, pivoting again, and then sewing down to this match point. You don't want to sew to the edge, just to the point we marked. So let's go do that now. I'm going to sink my needle into that match point and then sew around using my 1/2 inch seam allowance. Stop at the match point, back tack, and clip your threads. All right, we're now going to clip our corners. And then we'll grade the seam allowance of the upper collar. So again, that is the collar that is interfaced. So just grade that by trimming it in half. Right. And here you can see the graded seam allowance. Our next step is to turn the collar right side out. Now what I like to do is just go in and give a light press to the areas I can reach. I'm pressing the upper collar away from the under collar. My little ironing board keeps moving. And then we're going to turn the collar right sides facing out. get into those corners. If you have a point turner, that'll work great. I use a bone folder. And you can also kind of use your fingernails to shape the point a bit. We're now going to press along our seam line to make sure everything's nice and flat. You can use your fingers to work the collar slightly just to get a really nice edge. And I have the under collar facing up right now. You should be able to see right here that the seam line is rolling towards the under collar, and that is the reason why it was slightly shorter than the upper collar, and that's in action right now, what's happening. So keep working around and pressing. We now have a nice flat collar. The two lower edges meet. The seam line has rolled towards the under collar, and from the front, it looks like this. You can also see here where we stopped at the match point and we have these two open edges. We'll need this when attaching it to our collar, which we're going to do now. All right, so grab your shirt or dress and your collar. And with the wrong side of the upper collar facing up, so you have the inner facing up, we're going to attach this to the inside of the neckline. So we're going to start at the edge. Here we have the folded side seam of the collar meets that point where we clipped on the shirt. So pin that. Then a little further over, we have our notch. This is going to match to the notch on the neckline. My interfacing closed up my notches, so just need to recut them. You can do that as well on yours if you had the same problem. Then further along the neckline, we have the second notch, which is the mirror image of the first. Match those. And then continue over to the edge. And again, we have the seam allowance of the collar, matching that point where we clipped. Oh God, that pin was backwards. Okay, so I just stabbed myself, but our pin is now in. So now we have a concave curve at the neckline and a convex curve at the collar. So at first glance, it looks like these seam allowances aren't going to line up. We want to align the seam line, which is a 1/2 inch in, not the cut line. So those will match up. You can see how I do that here. Just use your fingers to work it in. And perfect. Now, same type of idea with the center. It's not as dramatic. The neckline is still a very concave curve, but the collar is slightly concave at that point, sort of straight, so it'll be a lot easier. So again, I pinned from the center and then out. And then repeat those steps for the other side. Again, finding the center. And then pinning on both sides. Your collar will now look like this. It's a little awkward because it's a placket, doesn't open all the way, but we're now going to head over to the machine and sew from this clipped point across over to the other side using our 1/2 inch seam allowance. So let's go do that now. All right, here we are at the machine, and we're just going to start right from that point, sew across. So again, I like to sink my needle before I get started. And since we're sewing 2 opposite curves, you're going to want to use your fingers to make sure you're not sewing any pleats or gathers or tucks in. Make sure everything feels smooth. If it doesn't feel smooth, lift your presser foot and double check and adjust it. If it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. It's my personal motto. Work your way across the collar. Again, where those curves are more pronounced. Make sure everything is nice and flat. And there we are. Back at the other point. So you can see here, we've ended right at the point we clipped to. Okay, our collar is attached, and we're now going to grade the seam allowance. Double check just to make sure there's no tucks on either side before we start cutting into anything. And if there aren't, go ahead and trim the seam allowance of the interfaced upper collar in half. Now after we've done that, we're going to go in and clip every 1/2 inch or 3/4 inch or so to, but not through the seam line, just to release the curve. I need to get my scissors sharpened so my shears aren't sharp all the way to the point right now. And just work around the collar. Again, to, but not through the seam allowance. And here you can see our clipped and braided edge. All right, now we need to press our collar away from the shirt. Our seam allowance will also be pressed away from the shirt. That way we can catch it into the collar to finish the edge. And I do this on a ham because, again, curved seam. Make sure everything's pointing up. And just work around the collar. You're going to want to do this in small pieces. You're not ironing across a large point because you don't want to iron any folds or tucks in. And due to the curve, you're going to have to reposition a lot. Alright, so our collar and our seam allowance are now pressed up into the collar. Now what we need to do is flip your shirt so the unattached undercollar is facing up. I like to do this starting at the center and again on a ham because of curved surface. Lay it out flat, and we're going to just tuck the seam allowance under. You want it to hit your seam line from the top collar. Pin that down. Just work across the collar like we did previously, just a little bit at a time. And take a little bit of extra care at the curve. You don't want to press any that wasn't straight on mine. At the curve, you're going to want to make sure you don't have tucks like this. So I usually fold the center under and press the edge. Pin that. And then work between the two areas. Then do the other side. edge in place. And then do the area in between. So it's nice and flat, there's no tucks, and just pin. And there you can see the whole thing is pinned together. Now in the instructions, we have you hand stitch this closed. So you can do that, or I'm going to show you a quick and easy method using your sewing machine. All right, so here's our pinned edge. We're going to put this facing the machine. So the top collar is facing up. And then I'm just going to stitch directly next to the seam line on the top collar. Sink my needle and remove that first pin. At the other end, you're just going to back tack, clip your threads, and then here you can see on the front, nice and even. And the back looks great too. And that's it, our collar is attached, looks great, and we are ready to start our sleeves. All right, that's it. We are done for today and our collars are attached. Up next, I'll be walking you through the 2 ways to sew your sleeves. The short cuffed one, which I'm wearing here, and the video after that will be the full long sleeved. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments below, and make sure you subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any of our video lessons. Have an excellent day, and I'll see you back here next time.